All right, guys, we are live with I always say we're going to start a section called Ask Mike, because I feel like so many times clients come to me with these crazy questions that are outside of my scope, and
I
I
know,
say,
I'm like,
let me ask
what?
Mike.
Yeah, it's
Let me ask Mike.
literally,
Let me ask
yeah.
Mike. And I think that speaks to really that we really understand what we're good at.
Mhm.
I think there's a trend in the industry that people work way outside their scope. I like to stay inside my wheelhouse, right?
Yeah,
And anything outside of that wheelhouse, I'm glad we have someone like Mike who can come
like,
on,
yeah, yeah,
right? So I think we could probably call this like episode one, Ask Mike, right?
love it.
And the kind of the title that we talked about is 3 reasons you're not losing weight that have nothing to do with diet and exercise. And I think this speaks to the person that's like, Josh, Gray, I'm I'm tracking on my calendar. I'm doing good 25 out of 30 days. I just can't seem to bust through that plateau of making changes, whether it's how I feel, how I sleep, my weight loss, my strength, right? And that can be very, very frustrating, and people can quit. But what we do know is that there are other factors outside of that that affects your body, right? Um, I really wish it was just that easy, but sometimes it's not for some people, right? Um, so as we talk about this, I think this is going to connect to a lot of people. I think a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, raise your hand if you're frustrated because you feel like you're doing it right. And I think 70% of the people will raise their hand and be like, that's me.
Yeah,
I can't figure it out. Right. Sometimes the answer is, well, it takes longer than 30 days. Right. But sometimes the answer is, well, let's look at your history and what's going on and what you're doing. And so we brought Mike on, and we're going to talk about 3 things that have nothing to do with exercise and diet that might keep you in a rut. And Greg, talk a little bit about how this is kind of coming off your posting.
yeah,
So that's about give us a quick little background of why you've done this, and what sparked this convo for you.
yeah. So I have close family members as well as friends' parents with like cancer diagnoses over the last couple of years that kind of came out of nowhere, no family history. So that caused my family to start kind of getting our stuff together with using more like natural chemicals and exercising more and eating healthier and like basically just treating our bodies the way that we should. And then I've also been working with a lot of clients lately, or even just people in my life who are, like you said, doing things almost perfectly and they can't seem to lose any weight. And so it's caused us to look inside their body versus just doing the things on the outside, like nutrition and exercise.
Mhm. Yeah. And
So,
here's something we hear all the time, right? A lot of very, very smart people in the industry post on this. And they come to me and they say, my hormones are messed up, right?
yeah,
Some of that's kind of BS because not everybody has hormonal problem. No, it's not. It's sitting in your closet smashing those Oreos at 11 o'clock at night. That's the problem, right?
right.
Maybe you're not as consistent as you think you are. Um, but Mike, there are people that have legitimate biochemistry issues, hormone issues that are keeping them from getting the results you want. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And just say, hey, you're probably full of crap if you think it's your hormones. Speak a little bit about that. Speak a little bit, if you can, about hormone testing, because we hear a lot of people like, we don't know unless you get tested, right? Like, we don't know. Like, oh, my hormones are messed up. How do you know? I just feel like they are. That's got to be
Yeah.
it. Speak a little bit about that, Mike, and your experience with what you do.
Yeah, so there's 2 camps basically in the weight loss philosophies in fitness. It's just calories or it's just hormones. And we're kind of more a match in the middle because if the hormone piece is off, the calories that are coming in, the distribution of where they go and how you metabolize them changes. So the really simple example with this is you can have a male and you can inject him with testosterone and you can sit him on the couch for 8 weeks and he's going to put on 10 pounds of muscle doing absolutely nothing. That's because the hormonal foundation or the food coming in is entirely different. Take that same male, sit him on the couch for 8 weeks, feed him the same amount of food, nothing's going to happen. The body's going to stay in homeostasis. So that's where you really want to be thinking about, what underlying foundation do I have set up from a hormonal piece, and how do I know if something is off there? And really, you have to have an objective marker. There's going to be signs and symptoms, but a lot of those signs and symptoms are fairly vague. Fatigue, hair loss, poor sleep, joint pain, all of these things can be from a wide array of issues, and you won't really know what's driving that. So we'll kind of talk in generalities here, males and females, for what you may want to be thinking about, and how you can get these labs run, because that's another big hurdle that a lot of people run into. So females, two of the big things that I see show up in females is, if you're premenopausal, please get a full thyroid panel run with thyroid antibodies to see if your immune system's attacking the thyroid. I see a lot of females, even young females in their 20s, who they just feel really fatigued. They can't recover from workouts. Their calories, they're eating enough, but their sleep is really off a little bit. And so that's where we want to be thinking about. Thyroid is the thermostat in the house. It turns things up and helps you to burn off body fat, or it slows things down and you actually hold on to body fat. And so there's reasons why that happens. But as a female, a lot of times you go to the doctor and you're like, hey, can I get a physical, a full blood workup? And your physician perceives that as, hey, I'm going to run whatever insurance allows me to run, until they get upset with me and send me a letter that says you're running labs that are not necessary, and we are actually going to dispatch you from coverage. So this is the balance you have to understand, that if a healthcare provider starts running a lot of extra things, insurance might tell them, we're not going to cover you anymore. And if you lose, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield coverage as a physician, that might be 50% of your patients. So then how do you do this? Well, you can either self-pay, and there's a variety of ways to do that we can talk about, but you can just pay cash and say, hey, LabCorp, I want these values, please run them for me. And life extension, for example, you can Google life extension lab work, and there's all kinds of labs that you can just pay for out of pocket. And the second way to do this is, if you have a good relationship with your primary care provider, there are certain ways that you can code for this in terms of the billing codes that insurance will still cover it. So for thyroid, you can use fairly generic ICD-10 codes like fatigue, and it'll still get covered, and you can still have insurance pay for that lab. So there's a lot more to that conversation, but that's just a very basic overview. Now, the other thing too with females is postmenopausal females, lots and lots of hormone dysregulation, low estrogen, low progesterone, sometimes low testosterone. And you don't really think about this in a female, but testosterone plays a major role in females as well as males. It's just the overall ratio is different. So females, much less testosterone and much more estrogen, and vice versa in males. But if you have a female with really low testosterone, they're not going to be able to hold on to body mass in terms of lean muscle mass. They're going to have a hard time losing weight. They're going to be unmotivated. And these are the people that kind of get kicked to the curb in the social media realm, where it's just kind of like, you guys you don't have the right mindset, and you just got to get more motivated and watch more self-help video. There's nothing to do with that. If the neurochemistry in the brain, those neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, all of those things are driven by hormones. They're driven by micronutrients. For example, you have to have iron to make dopamine, which is that reward hormone, that seeking hormone. So if you're an anemic female who's hypothyroid, your thyroid's slow, yeah, you're going to be really fatigued, you're going to be unmotivated, and you're going to not know why you don't want to go work out. And none of that has anything to do with your mindset.
1,000%. Yes. Yeah. I think those people do get thrown to the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are in I've learned to despise the word motivation. And I think social media made me despise motivation, because there's only so many David Goggins videos I can watch before I want to throw up. Right? It's your fault. You're the problem. It's your fault. You're not tough enough. And some people got legitimate issues.
Yeah.
Some people got legitimate concerns. Now, do some people use those as a crutch, and they try to say, oh, it's got to be my hormones? And then when you do the testing, you find out it's not their hormones, right? Like that's real too, right? So hormones, biochemistry, right? Getting those things looked at if you're doing everything right. Mm-hmm. What I think is the next biggest one, and probably the most prevalent one that I see, and me and Mike are just going to start working with a really good friend of mine on this, the gut, GI health, right? That is huge. Mike's helped me a ton with
Same.
with my stomach.
Yeah.
And I tell you, the number one thing that he did to help me with my stomach, because he's like, food variety.
Hmm.
You go start eating a more variety of foods. And it probably fixed 70% of the issues I had. It really did. When I started having better food variety. Mike, speak a little bit about gut health. If you can also speak a little bit on people who say, hey, I'm having gut issues, I'm going to do a probiotic. Man, everybody who has a health issue, a gut issue, will come to me and I'll see it in follow-ups. Yeah, I've been a little bit issues with some stomach that my gut this week. So I ordered a bunch of probiotics.
Yeah. Or they're gonna do, like green smoothies and stuff. I used to be guilty of that. I'd be like, well, I'm having some issues. I'm just gonna do a green smoothie, whatever.
Some green smoothies and some probiotics, right?
Yeah.
Speak a little bit on gut health,
Mhm.
importance in weight loss, and what do you need to see before you really go get gut health checked out?
Yeah. Most people assume that when they eat something, that they are going to utilize that, whatever it is. And so the saying is, you are what you eat. And that's halfway correct, but really you are what you absorb. So putting it in your mouth and swallowing it is step one, but the interaction with everything in the GI tract after that is step two, because it still has to get out of the GI tract and into the bloodstream, and then actually out of the bloodstream and into the cell where it has an effect. So that's where we want to be thinking about from a gut health perspective and a probiotic perspective. You consume this probiotic, you swallow it, and most people think the capsule pops open and then all of a sudden those microbes set up shop in the gut and I'm good to go. And while that simplistic explanation sounds good and it's easy for our brains to digest mentally, that's not actually what works. And so when you look in the literature, probiotics do not colonize in the gut. Now, they do have a positive effect and they change a lot of different variables. So, for example, those that suffer with like IBS, taking probiotics improves outcomes subjectively in the individual, how they feel, and objectively in markers. So
Subjectively matters, right? Subjectively matters. Right?
Yeah. So that's not to say they don't work. They do, but not in the way that a lot of people think they do. And so if you're having issues like bloating, indigestion, heartburn, food sitting in your stomach, it's taking a long time to digest, probiotics are probably not going to fix a lot of those things. And it may actually be contraindicated. You may not want to use them. It may make things worse depending on the type of probiotic you use. So, like I said, this can be a very in-depth, complex conversation.
We'll go more into this. I feel like after even being here for 10 minutes, we need to break these down.
Yeah. This is intro.
Yeah. And so that's where people need to understand that probiotics or positive organisms only exist in your gut if they have a food source. Think about this very simplistically. Just like in nature, if there is no food source or water source for the organism, it's going to leave. It's going to migrate somewhere else. Well, same thing in the gut. And so if you run GI stool testing on somebody and it gives you a report on the microbes that should and should not be there, if there's lack in good microorganisms and overgrowth of negative organisms, you want to be thinking about, instead of just, hey, I want to take stuff to kill the bad bugs and take stuff to grow the good bugs, think about the environment as a whole. That's the issue, because you as an individual, what you're doing and not doing, what you're eating and not eating, allows for the growth of certain things and dampens the growth of other things. So food diversity in terms of what you're eating plays the single most impactful role in gut diversity over and above anything else that you can currently do. That includes probiotics, that includes things like fecal microbial transplants, where you're literally taking the microbiome from another individual and putting it in someone else and trying to shift their micro. Over and above all of that, dietary diversity plays the biggest role. So the more foods that you're eating on a daily basis, the better. When you look at data on most people, they're eating anywhere from like 7 to 10 different foods over the course of a week. That's not that.
I eat that in like a single meal.
Yeah. So, and the thing that people need to keep in mind is that food itself doesn't have the highest antioxidant content. So everybody's all about blueberries and kale and acai berries or acai berries, however you want to say that. But those actually have a lower antioxidant value than spices. So spices are actually where you're going to get certain supplements actually derived from those spices. Like everybody's into, oregano oil because it's antimicrobial. Well, that comes from a spice and then it's just concentrated. Everybody's into turmeric. Everybody's into resveratrol now. All those things, resveratrol isn't what curcumin is, it's turmeric. All those things are spice derivatives. So it's something called the ORAC, or I think it stands for oxygen reactive antioxidant capacity or reductive antioxidant capacity. It's just basically the ability of the food to balance pro-oxidation or pro-inflammatory load and antioxidation or anti-inflammatory load. And it's just a seesaw that's going all the time in the body. And so you create more inflammation and oxidation with working out, with infections, with all kinds of different things. And then you want to buffer that, and you want to have some sort of capacity to buffer that with food. So keep in mind, dietary diversity, spices, these sort of things play a massive role. And this is why I tell people, please season your food well, make sure it tastes well. The more spices, especially things like salt as well. Salt helps you make hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which helps you to break down food. And it also helps with salivation in the mouth, which helps you to break down carbohydrates in the mouth before you swallow them. So when people are like, oh, I'm struggling with bloating and gas, that's where you want to be thinking about what's in the meal that can aid in digestion. Vinegars, for example, those stimulate the GI tract, turn on secretion of more enzymes and hydrochloric acid. And this is why a lot of people eat a salad with oil and vinegar before they eat a meal. It sets the GI tract in motion before the rest of that food is coming in.
Sauerkraut.
Yeah. So those sort of like fermented foods. And again, people are like, well, I don't have to take a probiotic. I can just eat yogurt. And I've talked to physicians that are like, well, if you take an antibiotic and it gives you an upset stomach, then you can just eat some yogurt afterwards and you'll be good to go. Unfortunately, the data on antibiotics is going to show lasting changes for 2 or 3 years in some people. Microbiome. So that's not to say don't use antibiotics. Again, there's certain times and places for that, but knowing what you're using, how long you need to be on it, how to fix the gut after that, this is all part of the same conversation that needs to be taking place with medical professionals and patients. So that's just another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So we covered hormones, the gut. We literally got about a couple minutes. I think what we're going to do is take this video, use it as an intro, and then build on 1, 2, and 3. What do you think? Is that a good idea?
Yeah.
Environmental exposures in a couple minutes. List some of the things that we're going to look at. And I know the hardest thing for you to do is say, be thorough in 2 minutes. But what are we going to look at with environmental exposures, right? We've all heard those stories of leaky faucets, the water, glass containers as opposed to plastic containers. Cover some of that real quick. And then what we're going to do in part 2 is break these down 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, the thing we have to keep in mind with environmental exposures is that everybody kind of pushes this off to the side, says it doesn't really matter. But now when you look at the literature and even statements coming out from like the Endocrine Society as a whole, they're discussing endocrine disrupting chemicals or EDCs. And these are things that are in plastics, they're in personal care products. This can even be things that the environment is treated with in terms of insecticides or pesticides at high enough levels. These things do absolutely influence the hormones in your body, irrespective of whether or not you feel that. And so this goes back to number 1, you have to test and assess, don't guess, and figure out what's there and not there. And a lot of times, the number 1 rule with environmental exposures is separate yourself from that exposure, regardless of what it is, whether it's mold, whether it's something like this situation in East Palestine. Again, it's very hard for them to get away from that, but that is definitely 100% going to have an impact for generations on those individuals in that area. There's no way to get around that. So really with environmental exposures, you want to be thinking about what are the things that I'm putting on my skin? What are the things that I'm inhaling in my lungs? This can be, the worst are going to be things like air fresheners, Glade wall plugins, things on your skin. It's going to be lotions. It's going to be even topicals like certain types of makeup, cleaning products, all of these different things. And
all the things we use.
Right. All the things that we're exposed to on a daily basis. And then the third thing you want to be thinking about kind of outliers. Are you living in a moldy home? Or do you live on a golf course where there's an exceptionally high load of these things being sprayed? So again, we can get more in depth with all those, but that would be a good starting point.
All right. We got 1, 2, and 3. I think we're going to build on these as we go. We're running out of time. Guys, we're going to go, and I think now we got to go more in depth, right? On 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, for sure.
This
For
is
sure.
a great intro. I really appreciate you guys coming on. We're going to get this out. And then in the future, guys, we're going to have 1, 2, and 3 on these, a little bit more in depth. And we'll go from there. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Bye.